The wind swept across the courtyard of Winterfell with a low, moaning whistle, stirring fine dust into the twilight air, and rustling the hair of the guards posted along the battlements. Winter's chill always lingered longer here than in the southern lands. And though it was still only early autumn, the north had a way of reminding its inhabitants that its breath was as cold and merciless as any threat beyond the wall. Torches were being lit in their iron brackets and braziers stoked with fresh coals, sending plumes of wavering orange light dancing across the stony confines of the castle. Eddard Stark stood at the top of the steps leading down into the courtyard, silent, solemn, his breath clouding before him. By his side, Jon Snow stood with the same quiet intensity. Though the boy's gaze was weighted by a certain unease, he had never been able to shake in the presence of important visitors. Soon they would be receiving the king himself, Robert Baratheon, who had once fought beside Lord Eddard in a war that had changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. It was said that the king rode north with an entourage that might fill the entire Great Hall, carrying news and the old, boisterous promise of friendship. Ned and Robert, two men whose bond had been forged on the battlefield, had not seen each other for years. Jon shifted his feet. He had no part in greeting the king as an honored guest, for though Ned never said it outright, Jon was not a high-born son but a bastard of the North. Yet, by Ned's side he stood, stiff and silent, wanting to prove himself useful. Lord Stark had asked him there as a courtesy, or out of some unspoken fatherly instinct, and that alone was enough to fill Jon with a bittersweet warmth. Catelyn Stark's eyes might brim with quiet disapproval if she saw him positioned so prominently, but for now, she was indoors, overseeing last-minute preparations with her usual sense of order and precise command. Before long, the cry of trumpets echoed beyond the walls. Hooves clattered on the rough path leading to the gates, the approach of horses and men. The guards shouted out their warnings and confirmations, and the heavy gates opened with a groan. In swept King Robert's retinue, banners fluttering gold and black of House Baratheon heraldry, shining in the dying light of the day. Horses pranced in, stamping as stableboys rushed forward. The king's outriders had arrived first, but soon came Robert himself, astride a massive warhorse, clad in traveling leathers trimmed with a hint of regal finery. Gone was the slender warrior Ned once knew from the rebellion. In his place was a broad-shouldered, thick-waisted man, with a voice that boomed louder than any horn. He had a black beard flecked with a few strands of gray, and his eyes were bright as he peered about, searching for his old friend. Ned descended the steps. Behind him, Jon tried to slip away, but the swirl of the king's arrival pinned him in place. There was excitement in the air that tugged even at the corners of Jon's heart. He saw how King Robert dismounted with a grunt, ignoring the outstretched arms of courtiers offering to help him. He stomped a foot on the cobbles and filled the courtyard with a laugh so robust it seemed to chase away the North's chill. "Ned," the king roared, "I've ridden half the kingdom to see that dour face." Ned bowed, his lips curving in a small but genuine smile. "Your Grace," he said in a voice as steady as distant thunder. He straightened, and Robert clasped him into a crushing embrace, ignoring protocol. "You damned stubborn soul," Robert said in a whisper, his grin wide. "Gods, it is good to see you." "And you, Robert," Ned replied, using the king's name with the familiarity of long friendship. "Winterfell is yours for as long as you choose to stay." Robert peered past Ned, as though searching for something, or someone. "Now, where is that lovely wife of yours?" "She is inside, ensuring a proper welcome for your grace," Ned said. His tone did not waver, but he noticed the king's wandering gaze. Something in Robert's eyes seemed watchful, measuring. Just then, Robert caught sight of Jon standing at the edge of the steps. "And who is this?" he asked, the joviality in his voice tinged with curiosity. Jon bowed, a quick, hesitant gesture. "I am Jon, your grace," he said, but no more words came out. He felt the weight of the king's gaze and tried not to shuffle. "Ah, the boy you wrote me about," Robert said. Though his voice was loud, there was a hush at the edges of his tone. He stared at Jon in a way that made the boy's cheeks burn. "A fine lad by the look of him." Ned's expression shifted subtly, though whether it was relief or worry that flickered behind his gray eyes, Jon couldn't tell. "Yes," Ned said. "He's my son." Robert's gaze lingered a moment longer. Then he let out a great gust of breath, nodded heavily, and turned back to Ned. "I'll greet him properly in time. But first, get this steel from my shoulders and this dust from my throat. I need a hearty meal and a cup of good strong ale to wash down the road." Ned guided Robert inside with a courteous nod, and as they went, Jon stood, uncertain, on the steps. He sensed something unspoken in the king's gaze that he could not name. A chill overcame him, one different from the northern cold. He shook it off and followed, at a respectful distance. The courtyard's bustle resumed, servants ferrying chests, attendants leading horses to the stable. In the corners of his vision, Jon thought he saw glances cast his way. He ignored them, used to such fleeting judgments, though something about the moment still felt strange in his marrow. Inside, the great hall was filled with the aroma of roasted meats, fresh bread, and spiced wine. The torches cast dancing shadows on long trestle tables, bedecked with platters of steaming fare. Robert's party mingled at the periphery, while the king himself strode like a force of nature to the high seat next to the dais. There, Ned would sit at his right. Despite the lavish spread, Robert called for ale first, draining half the cup in one long draught, belching with unabashed satisfaction. "The North," he muttered. "It always makes a man thirstier than he knows." Caitlin appeared then, offering a graceful curtsy that Robert waved away. "We're all friends here," he said, though the ring of command did not vanish from his voice. "No need for courtesies every waking moment. We're like family, aren't we, Ned?" "Bar?" Ned inclined his head. "Blood of the first men in these halls, and Targaryens dethroned by our might. Though the realm has changed, our bond has not." Robert chuckled, looking reminiscent for a heartbeat. "Hey, and that is the reason I come, not just to see you, but for something important as well." He paused, noticing the presence of Ned's family. Sansa, Arya, Bran, and little Rickon stood at various distances, near enough to watch. Robb was across the hall, trying to overhear. Jon found himself near a pillar, torn between his wish to fade away and the pull of Robert's words. "But that can wait. Let us enjoy our feast." The great hall filled with the sounds of knives against plates, lively chatter, and the occasional bark of laughter from one of Robert's loyal men. Wine and ale flowed. The king called for hunting stories, battles recounted, jests thrown. Occasionally, his gaze would flick toward Ned, as if there was a conversation he was eager to have, but could not among so many ears. Other times, Robert's eyes would rest for a moment on Jon, not unkindly, but with a curiosity that pricked at Jon's composure. He wondered if the king knew or guessed something of his mother, or if he simply disliked the notion of a stark bastard in these halls. Yet Robert's manner was not scornful. It was almost protective, if Jon read it rightly. Finally, after hours of feasting and talk, the guests began to disperse. Ned insisted on giving Robert the solar near the top of the keep, a comfortable room with a heavy oaken table, a broad hearth, and a window that overlooked Winterfell's courtyard and beyond. Robert accepted, clapping Ned's shoulder in thanks. The king's men and traveling companions shuffled away to their respective chambers. The main hearth was banked, the rushes strewn with spent scraps and drips of candle wax. Only a few torches remained lit by the main doors, and the great hall grew dim and quiet. Jon, wiping his hands on a cloth, wondered if he should slip away to his own small chamber. As he started to move, a voice cut through the hush behind him. "Jon, remain here a moment." He turned to see the silhouette of Ned Stark, with King Robert standing behind him. The lamplight caught Robert's face in half-shadow, revealing the thoughtful pinch in his brow. Ned looked at the boy with that guarded kindness that Jon knew so well. The hall was almost empty now. Even the servants were quietly retreating. Jon approached them, trying to keep his posture straight. At 15, he was no longer a small child, though next to Robert's bulk, he felt insubstantial. The king looked him over from head to toe, then glanced at Ned. "Walk with me," Robert said, beckoning both of them to follow. They strolled through the castle corridors, the heavy stone walls swallowing their footsteps. The silence weighed on Jon's shoulders. He could sense that something important was unfolding, yet he did not dare question the king. Robert gestured for Ned to open a heavy door that led into one of the lesser courtyards. A guard on the other side startled and hastened to bow. Robert waved him off dismissively and took in a breath of the night air. The sky was a deep, inky black, studded with the pinpricks of stars that could be seen best here in the north's clear atmosphere. Overhead, the half-moon gleamed. They stopped near a stone bench, the surrounding area lit by a single torch in its bracket. Robert sighed, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "Gods, I can't stand half these pompous fools who follow me around," he grumbled. But there was less humor in his tone now. "I had to wait until we were alone, Ned. I have a serious matter to discuss." Ned's face showed a flicker of apprehension, though he kept his composure. "Of course." Robert looked between Ned and Jon. Jon felt his heart thudding in his chest. Was he meant to leave? The king had asked him to stay, so surely he was wanted here. But why? "You never told me much about the mother of your bastard," Robert said quietly, his voice strangely gentle. Jon saw Ned's jaw tighten. "But there's something I've always suspected. We once spoke of it on the road back from the Trident, remember?" Ned shifted. Jon knew that Ned guarded the secret of his mother with unwavering determination. He never spoke her name. He never offered details. The boy had imagined her in 1,000 ways, conjuring a face from half-broken hints and illusions in the corners of his mind. Robert continued, "I never pressed you, Ned, out of respect for our bond. But I've been told that Jon was born soon after the rebellion, that the timing of it was peculiar." His gaze swept to Jon, who swallowed under its weight. "And the boy, there's something in him. He looks like a Stark, yes, but not entirely." Ned remained silent. The torch guttered in the wind, casting dancing shadows across the courtyard. Jon's confusion deepened. He had always been told that he was Ned's blood, his child by a woman he met during the war. He understood little about the subtle tensions, only that it shamed Lady Catelyn, that it was a scar upon her pride, a burden upon Ned's honor. Robert took a step closer to Ned. "If he was mine," the king said, voice lowered, "you would tell me, wouldn't you?" Jon's eyes widened. He shot a glance at Ned. The notion that King Robert Baratheon could be his father was unthinkable. They shared no name, no sign. Why would Robert even consider it? Why would Ned hide it if so? Ned's jaw clenched. He lifted his head, facing Robert squarely. Jon had never seen his father so conflicted, not even in times of grave danger. "Robert," Ned began, then paused. "We've spoken of this in half murmurs before. You know that I made a promise." "The promise to your sister," Robert said. Jon blinked, reeling. Lyanna Stark was his father's beloved sister, the same one who was betrothed to Robert Baratheon. She had died during the rebellion, her loss forging a deeper bond of grief between them. So Jon had heard. Ned lowered his voice. "It's complicated." Robert's voice wavered with sorrow. "If he is Rhaegar's, I wouldn't stand for it. By the gods, I would not." At the mention of Rhaegar Targaryen, Jon's heart pounded even harder. The dragon prince who had allegedly abducted Lyanna, the cause of the rebellion. Jon thought it impossible that Ned would stand silent if he were truly the product of that union. The realm had hated Rhaegar, had scorned him for his role in the war. But Ned said nothing of Targaryens now. Instead, Ned inhaled shakily. "Jon is my blood, Robert. That is what I must stand by." Jon felt both relief and an odd pang of disappointment at Ned's words. If Ned was truly his father, that was the end of it, unless there was a half-truth or a hidden detail. Robert studied Ned for a long moment, then turned his gaze onto Jon once again. The king's eyes were dark, the lines of his face etched with old regrets. "Ned, we share many secrets, but I sense you holding back. Regardless, I owe you my life and my throne. If you say the boy is yours, then I believe it. But hear me well." He placed a firm hand on Jon's shoulder, surprising the boy with the heaviness of that grip. "You fought at my side. You saved me from the sword a dozen times. I have no true-born sons worth naming. My Joffrey is not the son I hoped for. The realm can see what a snake he is becoming. I can't rely on him, nor do I trust him to safeguard the future of House Baratheon." He paused, and his next words made Jon's ears ring. "I want to claim Jon as my own." Jon's breath caught, and he realized Ned's hands were clenched into fists, though the older man did not immediately protest. The king continued, "If you swear to me that the boy is not tainted by Targaryen blood, I'd name him my heir in front of all the lords in the Seven Kingdoms, if that would protect the realm from a boy like Joffrey." Robert let out a humorless laugh. "The Lannisters think they've ensnared me with their golden ties, but I know enough to sense what's rotting beneath the surface." Ned found his voice again, though it was cautious. "You know what you're saying, Robert. This is no small thing. To name Jon your heir, above your own children, would spark a storm beyond measure." "Let the storms come," Robert rumbled. "They call me the Storm Lord, do they not? I've had enough of that wretched brat Joffrey. Even Myrcella and Tommen are decent children, but they're not sons in the eyes of tradition. If I must rely on a strong heir, I'd rather have a boy raised in the north, with the honor of House Stark in his bones." Jon's mind reeled, uncomprehending. He was a bastard, raised alongside the Stark children but always told he had no true place. And now the king of the Seven Kingdoms was offering him a claim? Why would Robert, half drunk or not, voice such madness? Ned's tone sharpened. "Robert, you are not thinking clearly. You can't imagine Cersei letting this stand, or the Lannisters, or half the realm. You'd be putting Jon in mortal danger." "I'm the king," Robert retorted. "I'd protect him. I can do as I damn well please. And the realm would learn to accept it. You'd stand by me, wouldn't you, Ned?" Ned looked at Jon. The boy shivered under the watchful torchlight. There was a tumult in Ned's gaze that Jon had never witnessed. "Jon is innocent. He deserves a secure future," Ned murmured. "But are you prepared for the outcry?" "Better an outcry now than a war later," Robert answered. "If I let Joffrey take the throne after me, the realm will suffer. His cruelty is already evident, and he's not yet a man grown. I can't risk it. We can't risk it." Jon could barely breathe. Words finally slipped from him. "Your Grace, I am not sure what to say." He couldn't fathom the consequences of becoming King Robert's acknowledged son. It was a fantasy he might have dared indulge in stray moments of boyish imagination, but never did he believe it could truly happen. Robert's hand fell away from Jon's shoulder. "You've got the eyes of a wolf, lad. That's a good thing. Keep them sharp. I promise you, you'll not regret it if you choose to stand by me." Then he turned to Ned. "Consider it. In a few days' time, I plan to announce something about my succession. I'd prefer to do it here in front of your bannermen, secure in the knowledge that you support me. Think of how it might benefit House Stark as well." A lingering silence hung between them until finally, Ned nodded grimly. "You put me in a difficult place, but I won't refuse you outright, Robert. At least, let me speak with Jon. And let me think." Robert nodded, turning away to peer at the cold moonlight above the battlements. Talk to the boy. Let him decide if he can handle the trials to come." He paused, a heavy sadness in his voice. "I once dreamed of taking Lyanna for my wife, forging House Stark and House Baratheon into one. Fate saw differently. But perhaps in another way my blood and yours can unite. We'll speak more later." "Nasty." And with that the king excused himself, leaving Ned and Jon alone in the courtyard. For a moment, neither spoke. The distant cry of a night bird echoed over the ramparts. Ned's face was as cold and still as the stone around them. Finally, Jon found the nerve to speak, though his voice trembled. "Father," he began, using the only name he had for Eddard Stark. "What does this mean?" Ned turned to him, his eyes flicking over Jon's features in the soft torchlight. "It means Robert is offering you a power, a legacy you never imagined. A dangerous one." Jon's throat felt tight. "But you always taught me that I'm a bastard. I have no claim, no mother in these halls. Why does he do this? Why would he even consider naming me heir?" A faint sigh slipped from Ned's lips. Robert does nothing without reason, though his reasons are sometimes misguided or fueled by emotion. He sees the failings in his own children. Perhaps he suspects something about Joffrey's true parentage. Jon frowned. What? Ned compressed his mouth into a thin line. It's not a tale for now. But Robert's distrust of the Lannisters is no secret. Let it suffice that he wants an heir he can trust. And in his eyes you represent both my loyalty and the chance to keep House Baratheon's throne from falling into the wrong hands. And prefer that even a rumored bastard with Stark blood sits the Iron Throne over a false lion. A swirl of disbelief and confusion twisted in Jon's chest. But my birth, the shame it brought to Winterfell, Lady Catelyn's scorn, your promise not to speak of my mother, will all that simply vanish if the king names me his son? Ned's gaze softened. Bastardy is a stain in the eyes of many, but a royal decree can sweep away lesser truths. King Robert can legitimize you, claim you, and the realm will be forced to accept it, or at least face punishment if they do not. He hesitated. Jon, you must understand. If you accept, your life will never be the same. You'll live in the South, among courtiers and plots, among those who despise you for usurping their ambitions. You'll be parted from the North, from me, from your siblings. Jon's heart thudded. He had lived all his life longing for acceptance, for a place where he was not simply the bastard, and now he had the chance to be recognized not just as a true-born son, but a royal heir. It was dizzying. Father, he whispered, what would you have me do? Ned took a step closer, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder as Robert had, but with the gentleness of a father's love. The king asked me to let you decide. You're nearly a man now, Jon, old enough to consider your future. If you want to join the Night's Watch, that is your right as well, though it might break my heart to see you take the black. Or if you wish to remain here as my ward, that too is possible. But Robert's offer stands as a third path, one that might define the realm. If you become his heir, you could one day rule from the Iron Throne. Messieurs, they shall. Jon's knees felt weak at the idea. Rule? He had no illusions about that kind of power. He was just a boy with a bastard's name. Yet he saw the flicker in Ned's eyes that spoke of so many unvoiced burdens, secrets, and regrets. Could there be more to the story? Something about his mother, or about the Targaryens, or about King Robert's deeper fears for the realm? It all seemed too large, too heavy for his shoulders. Ned squeezed gently, then dropped his hand. Go rest, Jon. Think on it. We needn't decide this very moment, but know that Robert will push for it soon. I fear his mind is set. That night, Jon barely slept. He tossed and turned in his small room, the straw mattress rustling beneath him. Ghost, his white dire wolf pup, lay curled at the foot of the bed, silent and watchful. Jon tried to quiet his racing thoughts, but they only whirled faster, conjuring images of a golden throne, of scornful courtiers, of Cersei Lannister's cold green eyes, of Joffrey's sneer. He pictured Sansa at King's Landing if she wed the prince, as had been rumored, and how that would create a tangle of alliances. And now he might stand as Joffrey's rival. That would breed bitter resentment. He also thought of Arya, of how she despised all that southern pomp, and of how Robb would react if Jon were suddenly raised above him in rank. Would Robb understand? He felt guilt coil in his belly. The Starks had sheltered him, fed him, treated him kindly, if not always openly. He did not want to overshadow Robb's inheritance of Winterfell. But what was this chance, if not a once-in-a-lifetime dream that might forge his own destiny? Morning came, gray and cool. Jon rose with dark circles beneath his eyes. The castle was astir with the presence of so many royal retainers. Courtiers roamed the halls, gold cloaks gossiping with local men-at-arms. Jon noticed pointed looks, lowered voices. Whispers had no doubt begun to swirl. Perhaps some eavesdropping had overheard Robert's interest in Ned's bastard. Or maybe it was just the talk of the feast. the boisterous king, the rumored tensions between him and the Lannisters. Jon tried to go about his usual tasks, though no one had given him any direct orders that morning. He found himself in the practice yard, intending to drill with a wooden sword, to quell the restlessness in his limbs. Yet he saw that the yard was already occupied by a few of Robert's knights, men wearing the stag sigil, engaged in light sparring. One of them noticed Jon's approach and raised a brow, as if in condescension. Jon recognized the sneer from many men who saw him as an unclaimed child of uncertain lineage. A bastard. He hesitated. Then he steadied himself and stepped forward, determined. He was about to pick up a practice sword from the rack, when a voice called his name from behind. He turned to see Sir Barristan Selmy, an older man with a knight's bearing, silver hair flecking his temples, a calm but stern look in his eyes. He was said to be one of the greatest knights in the realm, though now he served King Robert, having been a Kingsguard to the previous Targaryen rulers as well. "Sir Barristan," Jon said, bowing respectfully. The older knight offered a polite nod in return, eyes flicking over Jon appraisingly. "I heard you were skilled with a blade for your age. Am I correct?" Jon swallowed. "I've trained with the master-at-arms here," he said. "I try my best." Barristan motioned. "Well then, do me the courtesy of a quick spar. I'd see what my king's prospective squire can do." His pause on the word, "king's prospective squire," made Jon's chest tighten. Did Barristan already suspect or know about Robert's intentions regarding the succession? If so, the rumor was spreading faster than Jon feared. Still, Jon steeled himself. He lifted a practice sword from the rack. Barristan selected one for himself, testing the weight with an easy grace that belied his age. The other knights ceased their own drills to watch, forming a casual circle around them. They began. Barristan glided forward, giving Jon a brief opening feint, which the boy recognized. He parried, stepping sideways. The older knight nodded in approval. "Good. You see the sword, not just the man." Jon tried a counter-thrust, but Barristan turned it aside effortlessly, showing remarkable control. A small circle of watchers commented quietly, some whispering that the bastard's footwork was decent, or that Sir Barristan was being generous. Jon felt his cheeks burn. He pressed an attack, staying mindful of fundamentals, recalling lessons from Sir Roderick Castle. Yet each time, Barristan met his blade with calm precision, turning the momentum just enough so that Jon had to retreat. Finally, Barristan gave Jon an opening that seemed almost too easy. Jon hesitated, suspicious, but he took it. He lunged, aiming a blow at the knight's off shoulder. Quick as a blink, Barristan twisted and tapped Jon in the ribs with his own wooden sword, the move gentle but definitive. Had it been steel, Jon's flank would have been cut open. Barristan stepped back, lowering his practice sword. "You did well," he said gently, "but never rush in if your foe offers an obvious target. It might be a trap." Jon caught his breath, shoulders rising and falling. "Thank you, sir," he said, and meant it. The circle of knights dissolved back into their chatter, though a few shot him curious stares. Barristan, to Jon's surprise, placed a hand on his shoulder in a manner almost fatherly. "Keep training. There is promise in you." Jon lowered his head, remembering how King Robert's hand had felt the night before, the weight of the crown behind it. "I will." He left the practice yard with his blood pumping, a swirl of emotions churning inside him. No moment was free from the undercurrents of tension. Everywhere he looked, he saw men whispering or glancing his way. By midday, he found himself in the Godswood, a sacred grove within Winterfell's walls where the ancient heart tree stood with its red leaves and carved face. Here, the air was quiet, but for the soft trickle of a nearby stream. Jon sank to his knees before the heart tree, the face carved into the pale trunk, seeming to watch him with deep red eyes. He had sought solace here many times, often with his father. But he was alone now, or so he thought, until he heard light footsteps on moss. He turned to see Ned Stark approach, cloak brushed with stray leaves. His father's face was drawn and thoughtful. Ned stood beside Jon in silence. He too faced the weirwood, lips pressed thin. After a long moment, he spoke. "When I was a younger man, I came here to think, to pray for guidance." Jon swallowed. Did you find it? Ned exhaled softly. Sometimes, the gods give no easy answers. Yet we kneel and we speak, hoping something of their wisdom enters our hearts. Nambranaxios. Jon bowed his head once more. I wish I knew what to do. Ned knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. You fear letting go of what you know. It's natural. Your brothers and sisters are here. Your sense of belonging, even if it's complicated. The choice Robert offers you, there's no guarantee of happiness in King's Landing. Is it truly my choice? Jon asked, voice strained. If the king commands it. Ned's expression was pained. Robert cannot force you to claim your legitimacy. He might proclaim it anyway, but an unwilling heir would be disastrous. He needs your acceptance. And if you refuse, I will stand by you. He must find another path. None. Jon's lips trembled. A part of him felt a strange thrill at being chosen, recognized. Yet a greater part trembled at the thought of leaving Winterfell for the cutthroat intrigues of the South. Father, he said in a whisper, tell me something true. Is there no chance that King Robert is my father by blood? The question hung raw and wounded. Ned's jaw tightened again, his eyes flicking aside. Jon, you are my son, he said firmly, not answering the question directly. That is all you need to know. Jon felt that old pang of frustration, but he also felt the quiet certainty in Ned's voice, an unshakable conviction. Despite the unspoken layers, Ned's sincerity was absolute. Then, if he claims me, it's purely political. Ned nodded, sadness in his eyes. He once loved my sister Lyanna with all his heart. In you, I think he sees the North me and some fleeting remnant of her memory. He means to do good in his own way, though it might lead to chaos. Jon bowed his head. I don't want to bring more chaos, he whispered. But if the alternative is Joffrey on the throne, he shuddered, recalling the glimpses he had caught of the spoiled, vindictive prince when the royal family arrived. Ned closed his eyes. I cannot decide for you, Jon. I can only promise that, whichever path you choose, I will do all I can to protect you. They fell into silence, the heart tree's crimson leaves rustling overhead. Jon gazed at the carved face, feeling the ancient watchfulness in the godswood. He tried to imagine himself as a prince, an heir, riding south with a king's retinue, leading armies, forging alliances, contending with the cunning webs that lords and ladies spun around King's Landing. His head spun with the enormity of it. All the while, he recalled the nights in Winterfell, safe by the fire, playing with Robb in the courtyard, squabbling with Arya, listening to Sansa's songs from the corner of the hall, chasing little Bran and Rickon down endless corridors. Would he be forced to relinquish all that? Would the Starks become a distant memory to him, overshadowed by the demands of rule? Ned finally rose, brushing pine needles from his breeches. We can wait a day or two. But Robert won't leave Winterfell without an answer, and I sense that if you refuse him, well, I know my friend. He might not take it gracefully. Jon nodded, cheeks cold despite the warm moisture in his eyes. I understand, Father. Ned's hand lingered a moment on Jon's head. Then he turned and walked away through the godswood's winding path. Jon remained on his knees, alone, staring at the weirwood's solemn face, trying to glean some sign from the old gods. The wind whistled, but no voice answered. In the ensuing hours, the castle hummed with gossip. Jon wandered aimlessly. He noticed Cersei Lannister's men in the courtyard, her green eyes flicking warily at anything that moved. Tyrion, the dwarf brother, had arrived as well, though Jon had not seen him in the throng. Perhaps he was hidden in the library, or about gleaning secrets. The presence of the Lannisters only magnified Jon's sense of dread. If King Robert openly announced his intention to legitimize Jon and name him heir, the Queen would raise all the fury of her powerful family. That could mean bloodshed, or worse. Jon felt a cold sweat break on his brow, wondering if he might become a target of assassins. Late that evening, Jon drifted toward the ramparts. The setting sun painted the horizon with streaks of pink and gold. The watchmen paced along the walls. Below, the yard slowly emptied of the day's bustle. Torches flickered to life once more. Jon rested his arms on the stone, gazing across the snow-flecked landscape. The wind tugged at his cloak. Footsteps approached. Jon turned to see a burly figure in traveling leathers, wearing the sigil of the crowned stag on his breast. For an instant, Jon's stomach knotted, thinking it might be the king himself. But the shape was different. As the man stepped closer, torchlight revealed him to be Lancel, King Robert's young cousin and squire. A pale-haired youth, lanky, with a somewhat timid countenance. He halted a few paces away, offering a guarded nod. "My lord," Lancel said, then corrected himself. "Forgive me, my Lord Snow?" Jon frowned slightly. "Just Jon," he said. "I am no lord." Lancel looked uncertain. "I was told by the king to find you. His grace is in the solar. He wishes to speak with you alone." The mention of a private audience with King Robert made Jon's pulse jump. He nodded. "Very well." He followed Lancel across the courtyard, up the winding stair to the chamber that Ned had given the king. Lancel took his leave at the door, bowing hurriedly. Jon inhaled, steadying himself, then stepped inside. It was a warm room, a modest fire crackling in the hearth. The shutters were drawn, candles lit on a heavy table strewn with maps and a few unrolled scrolls. Robert Baratheon stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, the other swilling wine in a pewter cup. He glanced over when Jon entered, offering a slight inclination of his head. "Close the door," Robert said. Jon did, feeling the heat and the wine-sweetened air envelop him. The king turned fully then, regarding Jon with an expression not entirely harsh, but certainly grave. "You've spoken to Ned," he said. Jon nodded. "Yes, your grace." "Has he convinced you to refuse me?" Robert asked bluntly. Jon flinched at the question's directness. "He told me it's my decision, your grace. He only warned me of the dangers." Robert grunted, lifting the wine to his lips. He took a slow sip, watching Jon. "He's right about the dangers. The Lannisters won't like it, neither will many in the south. But I've decided, for good or for ill, I'll not have Joffrey rule after me. I want a strong, honest lad who knows the meaning of honor. If you accept my offer, I swear to you I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe." Jon gazed at the king's broad face. He saw no lie there, but he saw a man burdened by regrets, by lost loves, by a throne that felt heavier with each year. "Why me?" Jon asked, his voice trembling. "I'm no one important." Robert stepped closer. "You're Eddard Stark's son, for one. Ned's loyalty is unquestioned. But also, I see potential in you. When I look at your face, I remember the old days. A time when I was young and foolish and believed in simpler things. You remind me of the North, and I love the North more than King's Landing with its viper pits. I need someone who can hold to that sense of truth. Also," he exhaled, swirling the wine, "I'll not lie. Part of me can't stomach the idea that the legacy of House Baratheon will rest in the hands of that woman and her vile brood. Perhaps if I'd married Lyanna, this would have all been different." Jon felt the intensity of Robert's confession. He had never heard a king speak so openly, so vulnerably. "I'm frightened," Jon admitted quietly, though it shamed him to say so. Robert did not mock him. Instead, a gentleness flickered across his eyes. "You'd be a fool if you weren't. The Iron Throne has destroyed greater men than us. But with Ned's support, and if you are truly his son, I know we'll endure." Now, Jon heard the words, "if you are truly his son," and felt a pang. But he sensed Robert was done pressing on that detail, content to accept Ned's account. The king extended his cup, as if offering Jon a sip. Hesitantly, Jon took it, tasting the strong, sweet wine, feeling it burn in his chest as he swallowed. Robert put a hand on Jon's shoulder again, though this time it was gentle. "I won't rush you, but I'll be leaving Winterfell soon enough. By then, I want your decision. If you say yes, I'll draft the royal decree. I'll name you Jon Storm, or give you a new name if you wish, though I suspect you'll want to keep the name Snow. And then I'll claim you as my son and heir before all assembled. No one will dare voice open defiance to my face. Though behind it, well, we'll deal with that when the time comes." Nester? Joan's throat felt dry even after the wine. Thank you, Your Grace, he managed. I'll think on it. Sleep on it, lad, Robert said, turning back toward the fire. And let the gods guide you, if they're listening. Jon bowed and made to leave, but Robert's final words stopped him at the threshold. Don't wait too long. In a few days' time I might announce it anyway. I'd rather do so with your blessing than force it upon you. Jon nodded once, stepping into the corridor. He closed the door softly, heart pounding in his ears. The hour was late, and the hall was dim, but he felt more awake than ever, as if he were in the midst of a dream he could not shake. Everything had changed in a blink, and now the realm teetered at the edge of a choice he alone must make. He walked slowly back toward the wing of the castle where his chamber lay, trying to imagine the shape of his life after he spoke his decision. If he refused, maybe he could remain in Winterfell, though Robert might consider it an insult. If he accepted, all the roads led south, to a world of splendor and peril in equal measure. He glanced out a narrow window at the courtyard below, picturing ghosts prowling along the walls, the snow drifting in the corners. This was home. How could he leave it? Yet how could he let Joffrey become the future king, if such an outcome could be prevented? His father's face rose in his thoughts, solemn and caring. Jon knew that Ned Stark had secrets. About his mother, about the rebellion, perhaps about Robert and Lyanna. Those secrets weighed heavy upon him. And maybe, by accepting Robert's claim, Jon could lighten his father's burden in some way. Or maybe make it worse. The Godswood's hush echoed in his mind, as though urging him to stand or to flee. In his dim chamber, with only a single candle lighting the stone walls, Jon finally sat on the edge of his bed, burying his face in his hands. Ghost padded in from the corner, nuzzling at Jon's knee. Jon stroked the white direwolf's fur absently, his heart a tumult of longing and fear. He could be a king one day, or he could remain the bastard of Winterfell, or he could join the Night's Watch and escape these worldly concerns entirely. Yet as dawn broke the next morning, he knew that King Robert was right. Joffrey would be a cruel ruler. If Jon refused Robert's plan, what future would that leave the Seven Kingdoms? Even if he was not truly the king's blood, even if he was only a bastard by name, perhaps the realm needed someone better than Joffrey. Maybe that alone was reason enough. But the days stretched on, each breath feeling shorter. King Robert continued his boisterous presence in Winterfell, but behind closed doors, tension simmered. The Lannisters prowled the corridors. Servants whispered rumors of arguments between the king and the queen. Ned Stark walked with a heavier step than usual, weighed down by the knowledge that soon, the time for decision would come. And Jon, for all his earnest heart, could not guess how the realm would recoil if he agreed. He only knew that the choice loomed, and the fate of the Seven Kingdoms might hinge upon his answer. Nina, Eddie. Morning's pale light crept across Winterfell's walls, illuminating a layer of fresh frost that had gathered during the night. Jon rose early, yet again, having slept only in fitful spurts, haunted by the question King Robert had laid before him. He moved quietly through the corridor leading from his small chamber to the great stair, passing more of the Baratheon men than usual. They were conspicuously stationed along each passage, some carrying lances and wearing the stag emblem on their surcoats. The presence of so many southern faces in the north never felt natural. Jon kept his eyes down, quietly noting the hush that settled whenever someone recognized him. He had no specific duty that morning, yet his restless feet drew him toward the courtyard. Wordlessly, he hoped that physical training might dull the tempest in his mind. Despite the early hour, he arrived to find the yard occupied by a handful of guards, Stark soldiers and Kingsmen, each group eyeing the other from a cautious distance. A hush blanketed them, as though expecting some imminent pronouncement. Jon glanced at the racks of training swords, the straw dummies arranged for practice. Memories flickered of simpler days, sparring with Robb beneath the watchful eye of Sir Roderick. Now, each time he picked up a blade, he remembered Sir Barristan's gentle correction, King Robert's heavy hand, and the path that stretched ahead if he consented. He took a deep breath and reached for a wooden sword. The men around him paid half attention, some whispering behind gloved hands. Jon could guess what they were saying, that the king's bastard was about to supplant the royal children, or that Ned Stark's oath to Robert Baratheon ran deeper than mere friendship. Rumors had a way of warping truth beyond recognition. Jon tried to focus on his footwork. He slid into a guard stance, struck the practice dummy with a measured blow, pivoted, and thrust again. The resounding thwack of wood on straw offered a momentary release. He continued this routine for a few minutes before he felt eyes upon him. Glancing sideways, he noticed Robb Stark near the edge of the yard, arms folded. There was a question in Robb's face, mingled with worry. Jon set down the practice sword and took a few steps toward his half-brother. "Robb," Jon greeted, uncertain how to breach the tension that had settled between them since the king's arrival. Robb looked at him, a furrow in his brow. "Is it true, what they say?" he asked, voice pitched low so no one else would hear. Jon had no need to pretend ignorance. The question was plain enough. "They say many things," he replied, sounding more guarded than he intended. "What do you mean?" "That King Robert wants to name you as his heir," Robb said, the words sounding almost surreal. "The men are talking about it. Father hasn't spoken of it to me, but Theon heard it from some Lannister guards." "I didn't believe it at first." Jon inhaled slowly. He saw no use denying it. "He spoke to Father, and to me as well," he admitted. "He wants to claim me openly, to spare the realm from Joffrey." Robb's jaw clenched. "That's madness," he murmured, though his tone was not hostile. "You're my brother, and I love you. But to leap over the king's true-born children..." Jon felt a pang in his chest, fearing how Robb might resent him if he said yes. "I didn't ask for it," he said softly. "I don't even know if I want it." Robb glanced at the guards, ensuring they still stood at a polite distance. Then he stepped closer. "Father told you it was your choice?" Jon nodded. "Yes. The king can't do it without my consent. Not properly. But if I refuse, there could be consequences." Robb's gaze flickered. "You know how dangerous the Lannisters are. Mother says so all the time. The moment you let the king name you, you'll be a threat to them. They'll..." He paused, as though he couldn't bear to finish the thought. Jon swallowed, sensing in Robb's eyes the same fear that haunted his own nights. "I'd be a target," Jon finished the sentence. "Yes, I know." A silence stretched, broken only by the rasp of a sword being sheathed across the courtyard. Robb let out a tense breath. "What will you do?" Jon shook his head, the weight of that question making his limbs feel heavy. "I'm trying to decide. I hate the notion of leaving Winterfell, leaving you and the others. But a part of me wonders if I can make a difference, if I can spare the realm a tyrant." "Nay." Robb stared at him in grave understanding. "Have you spoken with Arya?" "She's been asking where you are." "And Sansa?" "Well, she's busy fluttering around the Queen's retinue. But she must know the rumors by now." "I haven't had the courage to face Arya yet," Jon admitted. "She'll be so upset if I leave for the south." Robb gave a small nod, pressing his lips together. "You should talk with her," he said gently. "Don't wait until the king forces the matter." Then he laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Whatever you choose, you're still my brother. I won't hold it against you." Those words eased a tension in Jon's heart he had not realized was quite so strong. He gave Robb a faint smile. "Thank you," he whispered. Without further ceremony they parted, each man consumed by separate concerns. Jon lingered in the yard a moment, watching his half-brother's retreating form, the thick cloak swaying behind him. He wondered if, someday, he'd look upon Winterfell from the vantage of a distant throne, pining for the cold stone walls that had been his only real home. Before he could dwell too deeply on it, he heard a small voice behind him, pitched high and somewhat breathless. "Jon!" Turning, he saw Arya bounding across the courtyard, her short hair unbound, a look of determined urgency on her face. She had her wooden practice sword tucked in her belt, though the rest of her attire was that of a young lady forced into a southern-style gown for the king's visit, no doubt at her mother's insistence. The effect was half ladylike, half awkward, as if Arya couldn't decide which foot to place in front of the other when wearing something so formal. He braced himself as she nearly skidded to a stop beside him. "Arya," he greeted, forcing a small smile, but she wore no smile in return. Her eyes darted around, checking if others were listening. Then she tugged on his sleeve and nodded toward a quieter corner of the courtyard, beneath an overhanging gallery. They slipped away from the crowd. Arya folded her arms, frowning. "Sansa said that the queen told her, 'You're going to be a prince, is that true?'" Jon shook his head quickly. "Not exactly. Nothing is settled." Arya fixed him with that stark, intense gaze of hers. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked, voice small. "You wouldn't just run off to the south and be some fancy Lord Daytime." Jon felt a twinge in his chest. Arya had always been the sibling he felt closest to, both of them outsiders in their own way. He turned half away, looking at the frost-rimmed stones at his feet. "I don't know," he whispered. "It's not just about being fancy. It's complicated." Arya scowled. "Why do these things have to be so complicated?" She muttered, frustration flaring in her gray eyes. "You shouldn't have to go if you don't want to." He looked at her, uncertain how to respond. "Sometimes we don't get to choose our fate," he said softly. Then he managed a slight smile. "You taught me that well enough. Neither of us wants to be something we're not." She sniffed, glancing away. "Father says it might prevent a war. Sansa said Joffrey is not pleasant." Her voice went quiet as she recalled the day Joffrey had arrived with his typical arrogance. Arya never hid her contempt for the prince, and the feeling was mutual. "But you'd be far away in King's Landing. I'm not supposed to say this, but I'll miss you if you go," she added, voice cracking on the last word. Jon's stomach twisted. He placed a hand gently atop her head, stroking her hair in the way an older brother might comfort a younger sister. "I'd miss you too," he said. "Terribly, but I'd write, and I'd find a way to visit. Maybe I could have you visit me in turn." She bit her lip, forcing down tears. "And you'd still be my brother, no matter what titles they put on you." Jon swallowed the ache in his throat. "Always," he promised. "That will never change." She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly before she stepped back, adopting a fierceness in her stance. "If I hear that they're treating you poorly in King's Landing," she threatened, "I'll come after them with needle." Despite everything, Jon let out a breath of a laugh. "I believe you." Arya's gaze lingered a moment, then she gave him a curt nod and ran off, clearly unwilling to let anyone see her too emotional. Jon watched her vanish into one of the archways leading to the interior corridors. He felt the sting of tears behind his own eyes. Ghost padded up from behind a barrel near the stable entrance, as if sensing Jon's distress, and pressed his white muzzle against Jon's leg. Jon knelt to give the direwolf a fond scratch behind the ears, seeking solace in the animal's silent presence. He could have spent all day in that courtyard, lost in thought, but a commotion by the gatehouse soon drew his attention. The wide wooden doors swung open, admitting riders who bore the golden lion of House Lannister. Jaime Lannister, the Kingsguard known as the Kingslayer, led the procession. His armor gleamed in the sunlight, and the look on his face was one of cool detachment as he surveyed Winterfell's yard. Behind him rode more Lannister retainers, none of them smiling. They dismounted with quick, practiced efficiency. Squires rushed to hold the horses. Jon watched from a corner, stepping behind a column so as not to draw attention to himself, but Jaime's eyes flicked over him anyway. The Kingslayer's gaze lingered on Jon for half a breath, a faint smirk twisting his lips before he turned away to bark orders at a squire. Soon after, Cersei Lannister herself emerged from within the keep, flanked by her guards. She wore a gown of forest green trimmed in gold, the lion motif stitched intricately along her sleeves. Her hair, shining like beaten gold, framed a face of cold elegance. She approached her brother, exchanging low words, their voices too hushed for Jon to catch. But the tension in the air was palpable. Jon sensed that this was the simmering heart of the conflict. The Queen, outraged and threatened by King Robert's rumored plan, and Jaime Lannister, the man whose reputation overshadowed him like a dark cloak. If Robert truly intended to sideline his trueborn heirs, Cersei would not stand for it. Jon had no illusions that she might attempt something rash. Hoping to avoid her notice, he began drifting toward the interior archway. But even as he turned, he heard Cersei's voice ring out in the yard, sharper and more commanding than before. "You, boy?" He froze, every muscle tensing. Many boys roamed the courtyard. She might have been addressing a stable hand or a page, but her eyes bored into him. He forced himself to face her. The men around them stilled, uncertain whether to intercede. Then, with measured steps, the queen approached, Jaime at her side. Jon inclined his head, adopting the most respectful demeanor he could muster. "Your Grace," he murmured. Her lips curved into a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "So this is the young Snow," she said, letting the last word roll off her tongue as though she tasted bitterness. Or should I say, Storm? Or perhaps the king has another name in mind? "Dan'Ewan." Jaime's smirk reflected a predator's amusement, his gaze flicking up and down Jon's frame. "He's not much of a storm yet, sister," Jaime drawled. "More like a breeze." Jon bit his tongue to keep from bristling. Cersei's green eyes glinted. "So polite," she said. "I've heard that you have been entertaining some grand ambitions. I trust you appreciate the predicament you're putting my children in. They are Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, Prince Tommen, no matter how the king fancies his decrees." He forced himself to keep his voice steady. "I have no desire to cause harm to your children, your grace." Cersei's painted lips twisted into something like a sneer. "My dear, harm doesn't require desire. It merely requires opportunity. You are the perfect tool, are you not? A bastard of the North, easily cast aside once your purpose is fulfilled." Before Jon could form a reply, Jaime interjected, his voice languid but laced with an undercurrent of menace. "That is, if he lives long enough to see that purpose through." Jon felt Ghost's presence close at his heel, the direwolf's silent growl humming in the back of his throat. Perhaps Ghost sensed the hostility in the air. Jon steadied himself. "I serve the king, my lord," he told Jaime quietly. "He is the one who commands, not I." Cersei gave a short laugh. A brittle sound. "Well said, boy. A puppet dancing on strings. But who tugs them? The Honorable Ned Stark or the impulsive Robert Baratheon, perhaps both?" She narrowed her eyes. "Remember that the North is far from King's Landing. The moment you step into the capital, you'll be among people who do not see you as a mere boy. They'll see a threat. If you have any sense, you'll stay here in this dreary fortress where you belong." Now, her words struck with the force of a slap, though Jon refused to flinch. He swallowed the bitter taste that rose in his throat. "I will remember your advice, your grace." Jaime's gaze flicked to Ghost. The white direwolf bared his teeth in a silent snarl, but Jon placed a hand on Ghost's flank, urging him to remain still. With a wry twist to his mouth, Jaime turned to his sister. "We have business with the king," he said. "Let us leave the pup to his trifles." Cersei held Jon's eyes a moment longer. Something dark moving behind her own. Then she swept past, the train of her gown dragging over the frosted cobblestones. Jaime followed, gesturing for his Lannister men to come along. The courtyard began to buzz again with low murmurs once they were gone. Jon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ghost nudged his hand, sensing his tension. Jon cast a fleeting glance at those who remained, many of them trying to pretend they hadn't been watching the confrontation. He felt the urge to retreat to somewhere hidden and quiet, though he knew the entire castle was brimming with visitors and spies. He decided the only refuge he might find was in the Godswood. Once more, he made his way there, slipping past guards and servants who gave him curious looks. The Godswood was hushed, branches of ancient trees overhead, rustling in a faint breeze. The reflection pool glimmered darkly with midday light. Snow had not fully settled on the ground yet, but frost gleamed on the leaves, giving them a ghostly sheen. Jon found his way to the heart tree and sank onto a mossy rock, Ghost at his feet. He needed to think. Cersei's words were like barbed hooks in his mind. If he accepted Robert's claim, would he simply be used until the realm had no more need of him? Or would he become a pawn in a game of power he could never truly comprehend. And if so, was it worth the risk? Or the potential good he could do by ensuring that Joffrey never wore the crown? He lost track of time, letting the silence envelop him. Eventually, he heard footsteps rustling through dead leaves. Turning, he spotted Tyrion Lannister. Short of stature, known as the Imp, approaching with careful steps. Tyrion had a reputation as an astute observer, witty and cunning in equal measure. Ghost stirred at Jon's feet, but did not growl. Tyrion raised his eyebrows and offered a mock bow. "Ah, found you," Tyrion said, glancing at the heart tree's carved face. "I should have guessed you might retreat here when the castle grows too loud." Jon rose, inclining his head in polite greeting. "Lord Tyrion," he said, not quite sure what the dwarf wanted. Tyrion wiggled his fingers to dismiss formality. "I'm hardly a lord," he remarked wryly, "though I do appreciate the courtesy." He stepped closer, giving the weirwood an appraising look. "Strange old gods you northerners have. Their eyes see much, I hear." Jon waited, uncertain. He remembered how Tyrion had once given him counsel about being a bastard. How to wear it like armor. But that was before this entire swirl of rumor and tension. "Did you come looking for me?" he asked. Tyrion's mismatched eyes, one green, one black, it was said, slid to Jon. "In a way. There is talk that you might soon be as high above me as a crown can lift a man. I wanted to see how the newly prospective heir to the Seven Kingdoms is faring." "Men's-me-amber." Jon stiffened, though Tyrion's tone seemed more curious than mocking. "No one knows what I'll decide, not even me," he answered honestly. Tyrion's lips quirked. "Then your indecision is the only certainty in this nest of rumor. Allow me a question. Does the notion of a throne truly tempt you, or does it terrify you?" Jon's jaw clenched. "Both," he admitted. "I'd be lying if I said I never dreamed of something more than a bastard's life. But the cost? I know it's steep." Tyrion pursed his lips in sympathy. "A wise assessment. The Iron Throne is seldom gentle with those who sit upon it, or with those around them, for that matter." He shifted his weight, leaning on his cane. "If you choose to accept, you'll find yourself surrounded by a swarm of vipers. Court life is, let's say, more deadly than any battlefield, for the daggers are hidden behind bright smiles and words of sweet flattery." Jon exhaled, folding his arms. "Why are you telling me this?" Tyrion smiled crookedly. "Perhaps because I know what it is to live in the shadow of family expectations, family secrets, and the ever-watchful public eye." He motioned to his own form. "I was never meant to be a warrior, but I am still a Lannister. That alone can be as much a curse as a blessing. So let me offer you a tidbit of advice. If you do take the crown from poor Prince Joffrey's future brow, watch for the daggers in the dark. They won't hesitate. They will find you and they will not hesitate." Jon nodded slowly, absorbing the warning. He had no illusions about the Lannisters' capacity for ruthlessness, but hearing Tyrion speak so plainly of hidden threats made the realm's danger more tangible. "Thank you," he managed. "You might be the only Lannister who's honest about it." Tyrion gave a half shrug, eyes flicking up at the heart tree. "Honesty is my gift, for those wise enough to appreciate it. Regardless of whether you become a prince or remain a bastard, the game will continue. Make sure you choose a side you can live with." He paused, then, in an oddly gentle tone, asked, "How does your father fare?" Jon blinked. "My father?" "Lord Eddard," Tyrion clarified. "He seems a man bearing a great weight. Is he well?" Jon remembered seeing Ned's drawn expression in the days since Robert's arrival, the shadows beneath his eyes, the almost haunted air he carried when the talk of claims and successions came up. "He does what he must," Jon answered, though a pang of worry stirred in him. Ned carried so many secrets. Perhaps Tyrion sensed it. Tyrion studied Jon a moment. "Indeed," he said at last. "Well, you may tell him that if ever he needs a mind that can see around corners, I remain at his service. I'm quite good at that, you know." "None." "NDI." Without waiting for Jon's response, Tyrion dipped his head in a courteous nod and turned to leave. He moved at a measured pace, cane tapping the ground with each step. the hush of the godswood enveloping him as he disappeared among the trees. Ghost watched him go, ears pricked but did not stir. Jon lingered by the heart tree, Tyrion's words coiling in his mind like a subtle warning. He remained there until the shadows lengthened, creeping across the ground as the sun began its descent. Hunger eventually drove him back toward the keep. Supper in the great hall was a subdued affair compared to the earlier feasting. King Robert had sequestered himself with Ned Stark, presumably for more private discussions. The Queen dined with her children at a separate table, her face like a cold marble statue, Joffrey wearing a sullen scowl. Sansa sat near them, posture stiff, eyes bright with both fascination and unease. Arya, by contrast, ate quickly and glanced around as though wishing to flee. The rest of House Stark took their places with courtesy, while Jon ended up near the lower end of the long table, unsure if his presence was even welcome. He noticed that neither Robert nor Ned appeared in the hall. Some said they were closeted in the Solar with important matters. Others speculated that Ned was resisting the king's plan, and they were quarreling over it. Jon tried not to fidget, though tension gnawed at his gut. He ate little, pushing the food around on his plate. Occasionally he caught Lady Catelyn's glance. She watched him with an expression that was neither warmth nor outright scorn, more a guarded worry. Jon suspected she had gleaned enough to realize a tempest was brewing. Her fingers tapped restlessly on the table, as if longing to intervene. At last he excused himself, giving a murmured farewell to those at the table, and slipped into the corridors. He wanted nothing more than to find Ned and speak openly. This waiting and guessing tore at him. With quiet steps, he made his way to the Solar. 2 Baratheon guards flanked the door. They eyed Jon, but did not bar him from approaching. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door swung open. King Robert stood there, face flushed, whether from wine or argument Jon could not say. Behind him, Ned paced near the hearth, looking strained. Robert halted in the doorway, noticing Jon. The king's face creased in a weary smile. "Ah, just the lad we were talking about. Come in." Jon stepped inside. The Solar was warm, a low fire smoldering on the hearthstones. The room smelled of smoke, old parchment, and spilled wine. A single lantern hung from a chain in the ceiling, casting flickering light across a table spread with maps. Robert closed the door firmly, dismissing the guards with a curt wave. Ned turned, greeting Jon with a nod. The lines of tension on Ned's brow made Jon's chest tighten. "Sit," Robert said, motioning Jon toward a chair near the table. Jon obeyed. The king sank onto a large oaken seat, while Ned stood, arms crossed. Jon noticed a scroll on the table, bearing the royal seal, half broken. His heart gave a nervous flutter. "I'm done waiting," Robert said, cutting to the heart of the matter. "I have delayed as long as I can, but tomorrow we depart for King's Landing. The announcement must be made. The realm is restless, and I refuse to let that vulture Tywin Lannister keep pulling the strings. My father-in-law's hand is everywhere." He pinned Jon with an unflinching stare. "Your father," a quick nod to Ned, "thinks I should give you more time, but that's a luxury we can't afford. Will you stand with me, Jon Snow? Will you let me name you as my son and heir?" The words shivered through the air. Jon glanced at Ned, who held his gaze, a silent entreaty there. Perhaps Ned wanted him to consider the cost once more, but the final decision was indeed in Jon's hands. Jon's mouth felt dry. He thought of Arya's tearful eyes, of Robb's unwavering support, of the quiet understanding in Ned's counsel. He imagined Joffrey's smug face leering from the Iron Throne, the realm sinking into cruelty. He saw the burdens that might fall on him if he accepted, the enemies he would gather, the betrayals that could lurk behind every corner. Yet how could he let Joffrey rule if he could prevent it? He swallowed hard. "I don't want to leave Winterfell," he began, voice trembling. "This is my home, but I understand what's at stake, and I can't let the realm suffer under Joffrey. If it's within my power to stop that, I have to try." A tension released in Robert's broad shoulders, and his face broke into a triumphant grin, though Ned's expression only darkened with concern. "Good lad," Robert boomed, slapping his thigh. I knew your courage would outshine your doubts. He stood abruptly, stepping over to Jon and clasping his arm. We'll set things in motion at once. I'll have the scrolls drawn, the announcements prepared. By the time we reach King's Landing, you'll be Jon Baratheon. No, wait. Let's do it properly. He glanced at Ned. Do you prefer to keep him as Snow, or shall we name him Storm? Ned inhaled slowly. I believe calling him Jon of the House Baratheon is simplest. If you truly intend to legitimize him as your son, give him the Baratheon name outright. Jon felt a surge of conflicting emotions, hearing that name offered so freely. Robert nodded. Jon Baratheon it is. He gripped Jon's shoulder, gaze intense. I'll see to it that your name is recorded in every corner of Westeros. The realm will know you as my own. Jon looked to Ned, feeling a wave of panic rising despite his resolve. Ned's eyes reflected sympathy. We'll do our best to protect you, Ned said, though it was quiet and almost forlorn. But Jon, once we step on this path, you must be vigilant. You know who stands against you. Jon nodded, trying to steady the trembling inside. I do, he managed. Robert snorted softly, as though unimpressed by the mention of potential enemies. Let them try to stand against me, he growled. I'll break them, and if Tywin Lannister tries to stir trouble, we'll meet him with steel. I have half a mind to tear Casterly Rock apart stone by stone if he dares question my rule. Ned shifted uncomfortably at the king's talk of violence, but he did not voice open disagreement. Instead, he set a hand lightly on Jon's shoulder. We'll leave on the morrow. I'll gather my family. Some will come with us, some remain here. Jon, if you'd like, you can spend this night in Winterfell however you wish. It might be the last time you see it for many moons, perhaps years. Jon's pulse quickened. He could feel Ghost waiting outside that door, likely pacing. Yes, father, he said, ignoring how the word might ring strangely now that he was to call another man father in the eyes of the realm. But that bond with Ned Stark could not be erased by mere titles. He would always think of Ned as the father who raised him, though King Robert insisted that Jon be recognized as a Baratheon. Robert clapped Ned on the back. We'll have one more feast tonight, a final farewell to the north. Then, onward to the south. His voice softened for a moment, a wistful note creeping in. I remember the last time I rode north like this after the rebellion, so many years ago. Time passes too swiftly. Jon stood, uncertain if he was dismissed. Robert gave him a final measuring look, then nodded. Go, lad. We'll speak more in the morning. I'm sure your father wants to talk with you. Jon bowed, then slipped from the solar into the corridor, feeling as though his legs were made of water. The king's final acceptance echoed in his mind, along with the knowledge that tomorrow, everything would change. He felt a pang of grief for the life he was leaving behind. He made his way through the keep in search of peace. But the corridors were abuzz with activity. Servants packing, men from Robert's entourage preparing for departure. Already the rumor had spread. The king was leaving in haste, and rumors said he intended to make a major announcement. Many guessed it concerned the line of succession. Jon avoided eye contact, not wanting to confirm or deny anything. He found Arya in her chamber, or rather, found her finishing a lesson with Septa Mordain, who looked thoroughly exasperated as Arya fidgeted. The Septa gave Jon a polite nod but seemed relieved when he offered to escort Arya away. Once free of the Septa's lessons, Arya immediately bombarded him with questions. Is it true? She asked, rounding on him with parted lips. Are you leaving tomorrow going south with father and the king? He nodded. Yes. Father wants me to accompany them. Her face fell. So soon? I was hoping. Maybe you could stay longer, another fortnight at least. Jon ruffled her hair gently. I wish I could, but the king insists. And father supports him. Arya pressed her eyes shut, as if holding back tears. What about me? Sansa? Bran? Rickon? Even Robb, will you see us again? Her voice came in a trembling rush. Jon bent closer. I promise I'll come back one day, no matter what it takes. Winterfell is in my blood, no matter what name they give me. She swallowed, then hugged him fiercely, clinging to his cloak. For an instant, he felt how young she was, how precarious her world must feel. It mirrored his own uncertainty. "Write to me, please," Arya whispered. "And keep practicing your sword. Don't get stuck in some fancy council without a chance to fight." "There." He laughed softly, though tears pricked at his eyes. "I promise." She let him go at last, stepping back. Cheeks flushed. Then she dashed out, probably to hide her emotions in some quiet nook of the castle. Jon watched her go, heart heavy. Sometime later, he managed to find Robb. The older Stark boy was in the Great Hall, conferring with Maester Luwin about matters of the castle that must be tended to once Ned departed. Robb would remain behind as the Stark in Winterfell, overseeing the fortress while Ned served in the south. That arrangement was typical for an heir. On seeing Jon, Robb paused the conversation with a tight-lipped expression. "So it's decided?" Robb stated, voice neutral. Jon nodded. "We leave tomorrow. The king wants me by his side." His throat felt thick with emotion he tried to swallow. "Take care of Winterfell for me, Robb." Robb clasped his arm. "I will," he promised. "Though I'd rather have you stay. If you ever need a sanctuary away from the southern vipers, you know where to come." A fleeting grin ghosted Jon's lips. "That's comforting." He meant to speak with Lady Catelyn too, but she remained elusive, busied with final preparations for the king's departure. Jon guessed she might prefer not to speak to him directly, uncertain how to handle a soon-to-be royal bastard who had overshadowed her children's line of inheritance. He didn't begrudge her reluctance. The day slipped away in a blur of frantic tasks. By late afternoon, King Robert declared a small feast in the hall. Though it was nothing like the lavish banquets of days prior, the mood was more somber, the talk overshadowed by the knowledge that a long journey loomed. The queen attended, looking tense and regal, Joffrey at her side in sullen silence. Sansa sat near them, her expression a delicate mask. Arya was near the lower table, though her eyes flitted constantly to Jon. Robert offered a final toast to Winterfell's hospitality, praising Ned's unwavering loyalty. Then, with a heavy grin, he raised his cup, proclaiming that the realm would soon have cause to rejoice, though he did not specify how. Most lords and knights in attendance guessed the nature of his words. Whispers rippled across the tables, all eyes darting to Jon Snow. Jon tried not to shrink beneath so many stares. He sipped from his cup of watered wine, ignoring the knots in his stomach. After the feast, as guests filtered out, he felt a pair of cold green eyes upon him. Joffrey's. The prince scowled from across the hall, expression seething. There was no official announcement naming Jon an heir yet, but Joffrey must have heard rumors all the same. Jon did not approach him. Even from a distance he saw Joffrey's lip curl in disgust. The memory of Arya's scuffle with him, and the wolf Nymeria's involvement, flickered in Jon's mind. He wondered if that bitterness still festered in Joffrey's heart. Most likely. No, when they met again in King's Landing, matters would be far more dire. Night came swiftly. Jon returned to his chamber, unable to sleep. The wind outside keened across the battlements, weaving a mournful lullaby. He packed the few belongings that were truly his, a spare cloak, a belt knife, a small wooden figure Robb had carved for him years ago. Ghost paced restlessly. Sensing the upheaval, they would ride at first light, heading south. In the quiet darkness, Jon's mind drifted to questions no one could answer. Who was his mother truly? Was there any chance that his parentage might be something other than what Ned claimed? Did it matter now if King Robert would name him a Baratheon? The flicker of candlelight revealed lines of tension across Jon's brow. He feared stepping onto the stage of the realm's politics. Yet his choice was made. At dawn, the courtyard came alive with the clamor of departure. Horses snorted, stamping the cold ground. Grooms hurried to attach wagons, while the king's retinue strapped on armor and sorted weapons. Ned oversaw the readiness of his own contingent of Stark guards, who would travel south with him. Robb stood by as well, set to wave farewell. Bran was nowhere to be seen. Likely he was still abed. Or Catelyn had chosen to keep him inside to spare him the chill. Arya lingered near a cluster of stable boys, ghost-like in her silence. Jon wore a simple traveling cloak, his sword belt securely fastened. He felt no special sense of grandeur, just a hollow in his chest, as though part of him were being left behind. The king emerged from the keep, flanked by Jaime Lannister and several Baratheon men. Robert looked impatient to depart, eager to be away. Cersei and Joffrey came last, the queen's face unreadable. They mounted their horses with practiced grace, though Joffrey sent one last glare across the yard at Jon. Ned caught Jon's eye, motioning him over. "You'll ride with me," Ned said, voice subdued. "At least until the king decides otherwise." Jon nodded, stepping to the side of Ned's great destrier. He swung into the saddle of a borrowed courser, Ghost trotting near. He glanced at the high walls of Winterfell, the towers rising stark against the pale sky. This was the moment then. He braced himself as the king spurred his mount toward the gates, and the retinue began moving in a long, winding procession. Trumpets sounded a farewell note, echoing off the ancient stones. Amid the bustle, Jon glimpsed Arya dashing forward, not caring who might see. She grabbed his boot in one last desperate gesture, tears in her eyes. "Jon," she gasped, voice tight. "Don't forget." He leaned down, placing a hand atop hers. "Never," he vowed. "I'll write and I'll see you again. That's a promise." A stable hand pulled Arya back before she could be trampled by the shifting horses, and Jon had no choice but to keep riding, as the wave of travelers pushed him onward. Robb stood near the gate, posture stiff. He raised a hand, and Jon returned the gesture, feeling a wrenching sadness in his chest. Soon, the gates of Winterfell opened, the procession spilled out, and Jon heard the drawbridge creak. The wide road lay before them, leading south, winding through the crisp northern landscape. He took one last look at the ancient fortress behind him, the castle that had been his entire world, with all its complexities and unspoken truths. Then it faded behind the curve of the road. Robert urged them on at a brisk pace, eager to make good time. Ghost loped alongside, unusual for a direwolf to travel among so many horses, but no one dared protest aloud. Now and then, Ned would glance at Jon with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Jon kept his eyes forward, trying not to let dread overwhelm him. The king was in high spirits, occasionally shouting jokes or remarks to those around him, but he never forgot to cast a keen eye in Jon's direction. This was the first leg of a journey that would change everything. Jon could practically feel the realm's jaws closing around him. Cersei's animosity, Joffrey's hatred, the uncertain alliances of lords great and small, all awaited him at King's Land. But for better or worse, he had chosen his path. The day wore on, the road stretching, the north's landscape rolling by. The travelers conversed in pockets, though most rode in silence. Jon occupied a middle place in the procession, close enough to hear Ned and King Robert's voices, but not so close that he joined their conversation. Occasionally, Tyrion Lannister would appear, trotting on a small horse, offering a nod or a wry comment. Behind them, wagons rumbled, carrying supplies and some of the queen's belongings. The entire retinue was far too large for a swift journey, but Robert wanted to display royal presence wherever he went. As dusk approached, they stopped near a suitable clearing to make camp. Bright tents were erected, the king's pavilion at the center, Ned's and Cersei's nearby. Torches were lit. Soldiers and servants bustled about, preparing the evening meal. Jon rubbed his stiff shoulders, unaccustomed to such a long day in the saddle with so many watchful eyes. Ghost circled the perimeter, sniffing at brush, occasionally lifting his nose to the evening wind. Jon found Ned kneeling by his own tent, rummaging for a water skin. The older man glanced up, beckoning Jon closer. "We'll stop here for the night," Ned said, stating the obvious. Then his voice dropped. "How are you holding up?" Jon tried to offer a steady answer. "Well enough, father." Ned's expression tightened, his gaze flicking around to ensure privacy. "Listen, once we reach King's Landing, be mindful of everything you say and do. Robert may put you forward as his heir, but you must not trust blindly in the king's authority. The Lannisters can be subtle, patient. If they cannot stop this openly, they'll do so in the shadows." Jon nodded, heart pounding. "I understand. I'll be careful." "Mason." Ned gripped his shoulder. I've asked a few of my own men to watch your back. You'll still have to be vigilant." They shared a look of unspoken understanding. Then Ned stood, exhaling slowly, as if he bore an invisible burden. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we press on." Jon left him to his tent and wandered to where Ghost lay near the edge of camp. He sat on a fallen log, gazing into the darkening forest. The night air carried a faint, earthy scent, a reminder that he was still in the north, if only for one more day. He could see the flicker of torches where King Robert's tent stood, voices carrying across the campsite. It felt surreal to be here, attached to a royal train, recognized by the king himself as a future prince of the realm. He couldn't help but think of the cold stone corridors of Castle Black he once dreamed of. A life in the Night's Watch, far from politics and ambition. Fate had turned him another way. Tomorrow, they would ride again, and the day after, and the day after that, until the climate turned warmer, the roads dustier, and King's Landing rose before them with its towering walls. The Red Keep perched above Blackwater Bay. There, the game would begin in earnest. There, Jon would have to stand as King Robert's son or be devoured by those who refused to accept him. Ghost let out a soft rumble, pressing his muzzle against Jon's leg. Stroking the dire wolf's pristine fur, Jon stared into the moonlit gloom, imagining the shape of things yet to come. The path he had chosen weighed on him like a chain, but it was bound by honor as much as fear. If it spared the realm from Joffrey's cruelty, perhaps it was worth it. In the quiet hush, the flicker of campfires behind him, Jon Snow, soon to be Jon Baratheon, kept his lonely vigil, poised on the edge of a fate he could not fully comprehend. The North, the old gods, and the memory of Winterfell drifted in his thoughts like echoes in the dark. Whatever happened next, there could be no turning back. Okay, the end. Jon woke before daybreak, rising from a rough sleep on the thin bedroll outside Ned's tent. The morning air was cold enough to bite through wool, and a soft fog clung to the clearing where the retinue had camped. Thin rays of sunlight were just creeping over the horizon, turning the edges of the mist pale gold. Ghost rose too, shaking out his snowy coat and looking at Jon with those bright red eyes, as though impatient to be off. Around them, the makeshift camp stirred in half-silence, servants and soldiers rubbing sleep from their eyes, stamping numb feet to spark warmth, and preparing the horses for another day on the King's Road. Jon stretched his sore muscles, not yet used to riding so hard and so long in such a formal procession. Yet he had no cause to complain. By King Robert's command, he now rode among the more honored members of the traveling party, somewhere between Ned Stark's position and the King's forward guard. Technically, he had no official station just yet, but the men showed him a different kind of respect, perhaps laced with wariness, ever since word spread of Robert's intention to name Jon as his son and heir. Jon wished they would treat him as they used to, or at least that they wouldn't stare quite so openly. He could almost feel their curiosity prickling the back of his neck wherever he went. After breaking his fast with a simple meal of bread, salt fish, and watered ale, he helped one of Ned's men secure a loose strap on a supply wagon. He caught a glimpse of the king across the campsite, already in full voice, gesturing as he explained something to a knot of Baratheon knights. Robert's booming words floated faintly in the mist, a mention of continuing to push south for longer hours each day to reach King's Landing sooner. The mere thought of arriving in the capital twisted Jon's stomach with a mix of anticipation and dread. Once he set foot in the Red Keep, there would be no turning back from the path he had chosen. He joined Ned briefly near the tethered horses. His father. He would always think of Ned Stark as his father, no matter what the royal decree might say, had dark circles beneath his eyes, as though another restless night had haunted him. Ned offered Jon a small nod of greeting. "Are you well?" he asked in a voice low enough that none of the surrounding men could overhear. Jon shrugged, glancing around. "As well as can be expected. Ghost and I are eager to move." Ned's expression remained grave, but he managed a hint of a smile. "Robert will want you near him today, but stay alert." "I don't trust the roads ahead." Jon nodded. The King's Road was generally the safest route in the Seven Kingdoms, but bandits still prowled certain stretches, and the tensions between the Crown and the Lannisters could make even a calm road fraught with hidden perils. He had heard stories of riders who vanished in the night, their possessions looted, and their corpses found days later. One never knew where an assassin might lurk. The departure went swiftly once Robert ordered the tents struck. The grand pavilion that served as the king's lodging was folded and packed onto wagons with practiced efficiency. Riding forth, John found himself closer to Robert's side than he'd been the day before, accompanied by a small honor guard. The king seemed in better spirits than usual, or at least more restless. He wore a sturdy leather jerkin, embroidered with the crowned stag on the breast, and a heavy fur-trimmed cloak. Despite his growing girth, he cut a formidable figure astride his warhorse. "John," Robert called out, beckoning him closer. "Come, ride with me today. I'd have some talk with you." "Men?" John swallowed his trepidation and urged his horse forward until he was abreast of the king's mount, though a step behind to show deference. The king gave him a quick once-over, as though looking for signs of fear or hesitation. John kept his face as steady as he could. "You're quiet," Robert noted, sounding almost jovial. "But that's to be expected from a Stark-bred lad." John inclined his head. "My lord." He paused, correcting himself. "Father, is that what I should call you?" The question slipped out unbidden. It had troubled him for days. Since King Robert meant to legitimize him as a Baratheon, where did that leave the man he'd always called father? And how was John meant to address Robert? A brief flicker crossed Robert's face. Some mix of wistfulness and awkwardness. "A thorny question," he rumbled. "I'll not force you to call me father if it rubs your soul the wrong way. Eddard Stark raised you, and there's no undoing that. But in the eyes of the realm, once the decree is read and the document sealed, you'll be my acknowledged son. What you call me in private is your choice. In public, well, best we maintain appearances. Your grace or father, or something that doesn't sow confusion among the lords." "Nanim." John nodded, uneasy. "I understand." Robert flicked the reins, guiding his horse around a shallow bend in the road. The king's road stretched ahead, lined with tall, sparse trees whose leaves were turning to gold and crimson in the early autumn. Their procession kicked up dust that drifted lazily behind them. "Listen," Robert said in a quieter tone. "I know this is difficult, but we'll see it done soon. When we arrive in King's Landing, I'll summon my council, call the High Septon if need be, and proclaim it before every damned lord who bothers to show his face. Then your name will be written in the official records. No one will question it. Well, not openly anyway." "Benos." John glanced sidelong at the king's hawkish profile. "And what of the queen?" he dared to ask. "She's made it clear how she feels about all this." Robert's jaw twitched, but his voice remained firm. "Cersei will do as she's told. She might fret and fume, but she's not fool enough to start a rebellion. As for her father, Tywin, well, let the old lion roar. I'm not afraid of him. If it comes to war, House Baratheon will crush him again as we did at the Trident." Benendal. John thought of the potential cost of another war, men dying in droves for a power struggle they scarcely understood. He said nothing, but the silence spoke for him. Robert seemed to sense it, for he reached over and clapped John on the shoulder, though gently enough that John stayed mounted. "Cheer up, lad. We'll bring peace to the realm, not war. Our cause is just. Joffrey is no son of mine." He caught himself, shifting in the saddle. "Not a fit heir, let's say. The realm deserves better." John wanted to ask more, to piece together the half-hinted rumors he'd heard. That Joffrey might not even carry Baratheon blood, that the queen's relationship with her brother Jaime was more than fraternal. But he held his tongue. He sensed that topic was too explosive, even for the king's ears, or else Robert might speak of it plainly. So John only nodded. "As you say, Your Grace?" They rode on, occasionally passing villages that dotted the landscape, each one smaller than the last. At midday, they stopped by a shallow stream to water the horses. Servants hastily arranged bread, cold meats, and wine on a makeshift table. Ghost lapped water from the stream's edge, causing no small amount of chatter among those who had never seen a direwolf before. Jon tried to ignore the stares and found a moment's refuge with Ned, who stood away from the king's cluster of men, his brow knotted in thought. Jon approached quietly. "You look uneasy, father," he murmured, unconsciously reverting to that name. "Is something the matter?" Ned's eyes flicked to Jon's face, then to the king, who was laughing at some off-color joke told by one of his knights. "I'm concerned about the queen's retinue," Ned said in a low voice. "Her guards are restless, and her brother, Jaime, has been uncommonly quiet. That man is dangerous, even if his courtesy is pleasant enough on the surface." Jon glanced toward the queen's pavilion, a smaller affair of green and gold drapery perched near the stream. She and Joffrey had dismounted out of sight. "Do you think they'll act soon?" "I don't know," Ned muttered. "But be on your guard. If anything happens, stay close to Robert or to me. Don't wander alone." Jon's pulse quickened, but he only nodded, swallowing his unease. After a brief respite, the king called them to mount up again. The day wore on, the sun climbing higher, beating down through thinning clouds, until the temperature rose enough that some men doffed their cloaks and traveled in their tunics. Jon kept his cloak wrapped around him more out of habit than necessity. He still felt like he carried a piece of the north with him that way. They continued along the King's Road, passing travelers heading north. Merchants with wagons of cloth, a small caravan of jugglers and minstrels, hoping to reach Winterfell or White Harbor. When those folks saw the royal banners fluttering, they hurried to the roadside, bowing as the king passed. Robert barely acknowledged them, his mood alternating between loud camaraderie and sullen quiet. By late afternoon, their progress slowed. The party was large and unwieldy. Some wagons had trouble navigating a muddy patch in the road, so the king eventually gave the order to make another early camp. They chose a clearing just off the beaten path, surrounded by a sparse stand of oak and ash. Jon assisted with unsaddling his horse, brushing it down, and seeing that Ghost had enough space to roam. The direwolf seemed restless, sniffing around the edges of the trees as though searching for game. As tents went up, Jon caught glimpses of Cersei stalking across the campsite. Her expression was unreadable, but she halted by King Robert's tent and snapped at a serving girl who dropped a wineskin. The tension in the air felt thicker than it had that morning. Jon thought of Ned's warning. Something in the queen's retinue might be stirring. That evening, they gathered around several campfires to eat. The king, Ned, several lords, and the royal children all dined near the largest fire. Jon was invited to join them, and so he found himself sitting beside Ned, across from Robert, with Joffrey just down the line. The queen reclined near her son, sipping from a jeweled goblet. A hush lay over the circle, broken only by Robert's occasional gusty remarks about the food or the wine. At one point, Sansa, who had been made to ride with the royal entourage since she was betrothed to Joffrey, tried to speak up, praising the scenery they had passed. But Joffrey cut her off with a dismissive wave, and Sansa shrank back, her cheeks coloring. Jon's jaw tensed, though it was not his place to intervene. Ned offered Sansa a subtle nod of reassurance, but she lowered her gaze, plainly unhappy. Jon caught Joffrey staring at him from time to time, those pale green eyes filled with simmering hatred. Jon tried to focus on his stew, ignoring it. But Joffrey's presence was like a needle in his side. Near the end of the meal, Robert drained another goblet of wine and turned his attention to Jon. "So," the king rumbled, "how does the prospect of your new station sit with you, lad?" Jon swallowed. He felt the queen's gaze boring into him. Still growing used to it, your grace," he said carefully, mindful of an audience. Robert gave a rough chuckle, wiping wine from his beard. "Ah, well, it's good to be uneasy. Means you're not a fool. You'll have time to accustom yourself. We'll hold a feast in your honor once all is settled." Cersei exhaled sharply, setting down her goblet. "How splendid," she murmured the words steeped in ice. Robert ignored her, belching loudly. He turned back to talk with Ned about logistics for the next day's ride, leaving Jon to endure the queen's silent, venomous look. Across the fire, Joffrey was hunched, poking at the coals with a stick. No one seemed eager to speak with him, and he did not attempt conversation. It struck Jon that Joffrey looked more sullen, more brittle than he'd ever seen him. Jon wondered what words Cersei had poured in her son's ear to stoke his resentment. Night wore on. People drifted away from the fires, some to tents, others to stand guard. Ned gestured for Jon to follow him toward the edge of camp, where a handful of Stark men stood by the horses. The night was clear, studded with cold, bright stars overhead. Ghost prowled in the shadows, occasionally emerging to glance at Jon, then slipping back into darkness. Ned lowered his voice. "Keep your wits about you tonight," he said. "I have a feeling the tension we sense might come to a head sooner rather than later." "The Queen looks ready to snap." Jon rubbed the back of his neck. "If she tries anything here, with all these witnesses, I doubt she'd be so blatant," Ned replied. "But Jaime Lannister is cunning enough to stage a mishap, or to hire men who look like common bandits. If anything unusual occurs, if you hear fighting or see men creeping near our tents, make for the king's side at once. His presence is your best shield right now." "Nan?" "Or," Jon agreed, though his insides churned. He took up a bedroll near Ned's tent again, ensuring Ghost was close. The night air was brisk, though not frigid, carrying the faint scents of pine and damp earth. Jon tried to sleep, but he lay awake for a long while, listening for any noise beyond the customary rustle of the camp. Men coughed or spoke in low voices. Horses stamped. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. Ghost stirred, lifting his muzzle, but soon settled again. Eventually, weariness dragged Jon under. He dreamed of Winterfell's Godswood, the weirwood face weeping crimson tears. In the dream, the face whispered his name, calling him both Snow and Baratheon, in a mournful tone. He awoke with a start, heart pounding, unsure how much time had passed. The camp was silent, save for a handful of sentries patrolling with torches. Ghost was up, ears pricked. Jon sat up, rubbing his eyes. The moon hung low, on the verge of sinking behind the treetops. He was about to lie back down when he thought he heard muffled voices. Carefully, he rose to his feet. Ned was asleep in the tent behind him, so Jon stepped lightly, not wanting to disturb his father. Ghost padded at his side, silent as a shadow. Following the faint sound, Jon moved between the tents. He saw a pair of shapes slip behind a wagon. The moonlight offered fleeting glimpses. One man wore a dark cloak, the other had a glimmer of metal at his belt, a dagger, perhaps. Neither looked like a standard guard or servant. Jon felt his pulse spike. Could they be thieves or bandits? Or someone with more lethal intent? He swallowed, checking that Longclaw. No, he did not yet carry Longclaw in this timeline. Instead, he had a short sword that Sir Roderick Castle had given him for practice. He touched its hilt for reassurance, then crept closer, Ghost at his side. The men paused, whispering rapidly. Jon caught phrases like, "tonight," "while they sleep," and "the bastard," in a hushed hiss. His nerves prickled. They were indeed talking about him. Or so it seemed. He shifted forward, trying to get a better vantage. Suddenly, one of the men whirled, perhaps sensing movement. "Who goes there?" the man hissed, stepping from behind the wagon. Moonlight revealed a thin face with a scar across the cheek. Definitely not one of the king's knights. He spotted Jon, eyes widening. "It's him, the boy!" He lunged. Jon's instincts kicked in. He scrambled back, drawing his short sword in a clumsy arc. The man's dagger flashed in the dim light, aimed at Jon's gut. Jon twisted, hearing the rasp of steel on steel as he deflected the blow. The clash rang louder than he wished, echoing across the hush of camp. The second man darted forward, brandishing a short spear. Ghost snarled, leaping with bared teeth. The second man yelped as Ghost's jaws closed on his arm. He thrashed, trying to free himself from the direwolf's grip. Jon locked blades with the first attacker. The man was quick, his dagger flicking dangerously close to Jon's side. Jon parried again, but the force jarred his wrist. He wasn't used to real combat, not with sharpened steel in a life-or-death struggle. Fear spiked through him. "Guards!" Jon shouted, hoping someone would hear. But the camp was large, and many slept deeply. He gritted his teeth, stepping into his training stance. He saw an opening and slashed toward the man's shoulder. His attacker dodged partly, the blade biting shallowly into cloth and skin. The man hissed, staggering back. That moment's reprieve was enough for Jon to plant his feet and swing again. This time, the man managed to catch the blow on his dagger's hilt, twisting to lock Jon's sword. Jon felt the strain in his arm as the attacker tried to wrest the weapon free. Then the man's free hand swung, aiming a punch at Jon's face. Jon jerked his head aside, the blow glancing off his cheekbone. Pain flared, but he kept hold of his sword. Ghost growled again. The second assailant had managed to slam his spear's shaft into the wolf's ribs, forcing Ghost to let go. But the man's arm bled heavily where Ghost had bitten him, making his spear grip uncertain. Jon's heart hammered. He needed to finish this fast or call for help. He whipped his blade around, forcing the dagger wielder to dance back. Off to the side, Ghost recovered, burr bristling, eyes fixed on the man with the spear. That man, stumbling from blood loss, raised his weapon, though it wavered in his grip. Jon lunged at the first attacker, feinting high and then cutting low. The man tried to drop his blade to parry, but he was a hair too slow. Jon's steel slashed across his midsection. The attacker let out a strangled cry and staggered back, dropping to his knees. Jon's stomach churned. He'd never drawn real blood in practice. But there was no time for hesitation. He snatched a breath, turning just in time to see the second assailant hurl his spear, likely hoping to take Jon down before Ghost struck again. Jon threw himself to one side. The spear whistled past, grazing his left shoulder in a flash of pain. Then Ghost lunged, clamping down on the man's leg, dragging him off balance. The attacker crashed to the ground with a shriek. Ghost's jaws found his neck. The shriek turned wet and choked. Jon recoiled, blinking in horror as the man's thrashing subsided. Shouts finally rang out. Torches flared as men rushed over. Ned appeared, sword in hand, with a few Stark guards behind him. They surveyed the scene. 2 wounded or dying men, Jon standing with a bloody blade, Ghost's muzzle dripping crimson. For an instant, no one moved. Then Ned stepped forward, swiftly checking one assailant's vitals. The dagger wielder on his knees had slumped forward, unconscious or dead from the blow. The other was clearly beyond help. "What happened?" Ned demanded, turning to Jon. Jon panted, trying to master the pounding of his heart. They were speaking of attacking me. I caught them lurking by the wagon." By now, more men gathered. Robert himself stormed over, wearing only a loose shirt, his broad chest covered in coarse hair, eyes wild with anger. "An attack," he roared. "Who dares strike in my camp?" Ned knelt by the dying man, searching him for any insignia. One of the Stark guards discovered a small coin pouch embroidered with a golden lion's head. He lifted it for all to see. Murmurs rose among those gathered. Robert's face went dark with fury. "Lannisters!" he spat, seizing the pouch and flinging it aside. In the torchlight, the queen appeared, her golden hair unbound, wearing a simple robe. Joffrey trailed behind her, face pale. "What's this commotion?" Cersei demanded, surveying the scene. Her eyes flickered from Ned to Jon, and then to the dead men, one still wheezing faintly. "How dreadful," she said, voice tight. "Bandits on the King's Road." Robert advanced on her, fists clenched. "Your men," he growled. "They carry your house sign. Care to explain why they were slinking around in the dark, aiming for the boy?" Cersei's eyes narrowed. "They carry a lion's head because Tywin Lannister pays many sellswords for protection along the roads. That doesn't make them mine, nor does it prove any involvement. Bandits can filch pouches from caravans. Perhaps they stole it. You can't simply presume they serve me. Or do you imagine I sent assassins in my own husband's camp?" "Ma'am." Tension crackled, the ring of onlookers caught between these two lethal forces. Jon felt adrenaline still surging, his shoulders stinging where the spear had grazed him. Ghost pressed against his leg, muzzle stained with blood. Joffrey stared at Ghost with a mix of revulsion and what might have been fear, as though recalling a previous direwolf encounter. Ned stood, face stern. We can question the survivor if he still lives. Perhaps he'll speak. But as he looked again at the man with the dagger wound, the fellow had ceased breathing, his head sagging to the side in the dirt. There would be no confession or denial. A low growl built in Robert's throat. "Convenient," he muttered, glaring at Cersei. "Too convenient by half." The queen drew herself up, leaning on icy composure. "If you think to accuse me, husband, do so plainly. Otherwise, do not impugn my honor with your baseless insinuations." Robert's fist trembled, as though he wanted to strike something. But a breath later, he spun on his heel, gesturing for men to remove the bodies. "Throw them in a ditch," he snarled. "Let the crows feast." Then he turned back to Jon, who stood somewhat shaken. "You all right, lad?" Jon nodded, though his voice came out shaky. "Yes, I'm fine. They nearly—" He stopped, his throat tight. "Ghost saved me." The king's eyes flicked to the direwolf. "Then you owe him your life. Make sure he's well fed. And keep your blade close. I'll double your guards from here on." He paused, glaring around as if daring anyone to object. "In the morning, we ride at full speed for King's Landing. I want to put an end to all this. The realm can't wait another day for me to declare my rightful heir." A hush enveloped them. The queen said nothing, but her gaze lingered on Jon for a moment, cold and assessing, before she turned away, beckoning Joffrey to follow. The young prince gave Jon a scowl that brimmed with resentment, then hurried after his mother. Jaime Lannister had not appeared, which in itself seemed telling. Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Come, we'll tend to that cut on your arm. You did well to defend yourself." "Inam." Jon let out a shaky breath, nodding. Men began to disperse, some still casting suspicious glances at the blood on the ground. The night had taken on a sinister edge. Torches flickered, revealing frightened faces. A pair of Robert's knights gave Jon a respectful nod, acknowledging that a mere boy had slain armed foes. But Jon felt little pride. His hand still trembled on the hilt of his sword, and the memory of the man's dying groan pressed on his heart like a weight. Ned led him to a smaller campfire where the Stark guards kept a chest of supplies. There, they washed Jon's shallow wound and bound his arm in clean cloth. Ghost lay down, panting, muzzle still red-stained until a guard brought a bowl of water to rinse it. Jon stroked the direwolf's ears, gratitude mingled with relief. If not for Ghost, that spear might have ended Jon's life. Once bandaged, Jon managed to find a moment's quiet. His cheek where the man's punch had grazed him was sore, a dull bruise forming. The confrontation had happened so fast he could scarcely believe it was over. He could still smell the metallic tang of blood in the air. Ned crouched beside him. "Get some rest if you can," Ned said, voice low. "I'll set men to guard you. We leave at dawn." Jon nodded, too drained to argue. "Thank you, Father," he whispered. Ned's reply was equally soft. "No thanks needed. I only regret that I didn't anticipate this attack more concretely." They parted, and Jon found himself near his bedroll again, though sleep would be elusive. Nevertheless, he forced himself to lie down. His mind spun in circles. Had Cersei truly hired those men, or had Tywin done it without her knowledge? It seemed too pointed, too precise to be mere coincidence. Their aim was clear: kill the boy before he could claim the throne. Somewhere in the camp, the king was likely drinking heavily, stewing in his fury. Jon suspected that if Robert had any doubt about forging ahead, it was gone now. The attempt on Jon's life would only harden the king's resolve to name him heir. Whether that was good or ill, Jon could hardly say. But the lines were drawn, the conflict set. Morning came with a low pall of cloud. The mood of the camp was sullen and subdued. Word of the attack had spread, fueling an even sharper divide. Men from the Baratheon banners closed ranks around the king. Men from the west who served the Lannisters seemed uneasy, gathering near the queen's train. Ned Stark's presence helped maintain some semblance of calm, but the tension was palpable in every quick glance and hushed conversation. They broke camp swiftly, Robert barking orders for haste. Soon they were riding again, a fast canter that left some of the slower wagons behind with instructions to catch up. The king wanted to reach an inn by nightfall. Ghost kept pace alongside Jon's mount, and Ned assigned 2 Stark men, Harwin and Darren, to flank Jon at all times. Jon didn't protest, though it felt strange to be guarded like a highborn princeling. He also noticed that Joffrey rode near the queen, far at the rear, avoiding any chance confrontation. By midday, they reached the inn at the crossroads, a familiar halfway point for most travelers heading from the north to King's Landing. The king commandeered the inn's courtyard, demanding fresh horses and stabling for his personal retinue. The innkeeper bustled about, terrified yet eager to please. Tables of bread, cheese, and ale were set in a covered yard. Robert took a seat, loudly calling for more drink. Ned stood by him, arms folded, gaze scanning the perimeter. Jon dismounted with care, letting a stable boy lead his horse to the stalls. Ghost lingered at his side, ears flicking. The courtyard was crowded with travelers, some wide-eyed at the sudden royal presence. Jon's new guards stuck close. He caught glimpses of the queen crossing the courtyard, speaking quietly with Jaime Lannister, who must have arrived earlier along a side path. Jaime wore his ornate armor, the white cloak of the Kingsguard draped over one shoulder. Their conversation was guarded, expressions tense. Jon settled at one of the lesser tables. A plain-faced serving girl approached with a pitcher of ale, nearly spilling it from nervousness. He managed a polite smile, receiving a small cup. He couldn't help noticing how the other tables fell silent whenever Robert or Ned or Jaime so much as glanced their way. He sipped his drink, scanning the inn yard. Horses whinnied, men jostled, peddlers hawked wares. But overshadowing it all was the sense that a spark might ignite a blaze at any moment. He kept an eye on Ghost, who paced near the edge, sniffing at wagon wheels and ignoring the uneasy glances of strangers. Before long, Robert grew weary of the crowd. He rose, handing his empty cup to a retainer. "Enough of this," he declared. "We'll push on. I want to be in sight of the Trident by dusk." He made a sweeping gesture for everyone to mount. The roads beyond the crossroads grew busier. They passed more merchants, farmers with carts of vegetables, and even a small group of men wearing the black of the Night's Watch, likely recruiters traveling to find new volunteers, or new criminals to fill the ranks. Jon watched them with a pang, remembering the half-formed dream of joining their brotherhood, a dream that now felt impossibly distant. They did not slow, pressing south as Robert demanded. That night, they made camp on a small rise overlooking the great river called the Trident. The water shone in the moonlight, and the distant rush of the current lulled many to sleep. But Jon's senses remained on edge. The attempt on his life weighed on him, making him glance at every shadow as though it might hide another knife. If the Queen's men planned another strike, it did not come that night. Perhaps the first failure gave them pause. Or perhaps fear of Robert's temper kept them at bay. In any case, the camp woke the next morning unharried. They rode on, day after day, drawing closer to the capital. The landscape changed gradually, fields growing more cultivated, weather warmer, the forests thinning. Villages grew larger, and the road more heavily traveled. Robert's mood veered between high-spirited rants and grim silence. Ned spent much of his time in subdued conversation with the king, presumably discussing strategies for the formal announcement and how to handle the Lannisters once they arrived. Jon tried to keep to himself. He practiced sword forms in the evening, always with Ghost nearby. Occasionally, Barristan Selmy, the old knight of the Kingsguard, would observe or offer a quiet tip. Jon found him courteous, if somewhat distant. Barristan did not seem opposed to Jon's new station, but neither did he openly embrace it. He was, after all, sworn to serve the crown, and the crown was Robert's to shape. At last, after many days on the road, the travelers crested a hill that provided a sweeping view of King's Landing. The city sprawled along the Blackwater, its walls rising in uneven lines. The Red Keep perched on an eastern promontory, its red stone towers dominating the skyline. Flags and pennants fluttered above the ramparts, though from this distance they were little more than bright dots in the haze. Jon felt his breath catch. He had never seen so many buildings clustered in one place. Smoke from cooking fires and forges drifted above the rooftops in a low pall. Countless roads snaked in from the countryside, merging at the city gates. Robert let out a satisfied huff. "Home," he said, not altogether warmly. "We'll enter through the gate of the gods. There should be a proper welcome for the king, but I've kept them all in the dark about my early arrival. Let's surprise them." Cersei rode near enough to hear, her expression aloof. "I'll retire to my chambers as soon as we arrive," she said coldly. "There's much to prepare." Robert waved her off without comment, spurring his mount down the slope. The retinue followed. Closer and closer they drew, and Jon's nerves coiled tighter. He realized that soon, perhaps in a day or two, Robert would declare before the entire court that Jon Snow was now Jon Baratheon, heir to the Iron Throne. The thought filled Jon's mouth with a metallic tang of fear. As they approached the city gates, the guards recognized the royal banners and hurried to let them pass. Inside, throngs of people crowded the streets, gawking. Shouts rang out, "The king has returned." Some onlookers cheered, while others just stared in curiosity. The queen's litter wound through the press of bodies, escorted by gold cloaks who kept the crowd at bay. The stench of so many unwashed humans assailed Jon's nose. He'd heard rumors of the city's filth, but he hadn't expected it to be quite so overwhelming. Ghosts sneezed and whined, pressing close to Jon's horse in discomfort. They continued up the main thoroughfare leading to the Red Keep, passing shops, taverns, and tall, crowded buildings. Occasionally, the king shouted a jovial greeting to the people, but mostly he wore a scowl. Jon tried to keep his posture upright, ignoring the myriad stares fixed on him and his direwolf. Word would spread fast. The king arrived with a white wolf and a bastard of the north at his side. At last, they crossed a massive drawbridge into the outer bailey of the Red Keep. Guards in gold cloaks rushed to form ranks, bowing as Robert dismounted. Servants hustled to gather wagons, lead horses to the stable, and escort the king's party inside. The swirl of activity made Jon's head spin. Ned guided him gently with a hand at his elbow, ensuring he wasn't lost in the bustle. Robert stomped toward the castle doors, demanding immediate audience with the members of his small council. "Find me Lord Renly, Lord Baelish, Grand Maester Pycelle, and Varys." He barked at a trembling steward. "We'll meet in the throne room, now." Cersei swept past, nose tilted high. Joffrey followed, but shot Jon a look of unbridled hostility. Jaime Lannister moved in the queen's wake, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Tyrion was nowhere to be seen, presumably heading to his own quarters or off to amuse himself. Meanwhile, the courtyard filled with the smell of horses and the echo of commands as men unloaded the wagons. Ned paused, turning to Jon. "I'll go with Robert to ensure he doesn't do anything rash." "Wait here until I send for you," he instructed, voice grim but steady. "You'll be introduced soon enough. I want you to remain safe until the official announcement is made." Jon nodded, uncertain. "Yes, father," he said, clinging to the last bits of comfort. Then Ned vanished into the keep with Robert. Left standing among the chaos, Jon held Ghost's collar to keep the wolf calm. Harwin and Darren waited on either side, the Stark men continuing to guard him. Though none openly threatened Jon in the courtyard, he still felt the glances, curiosity, confusion, some quiet loathing from the Lannister-aligned soldiers. No matter. He would keep his head high. Before long, a steward in the red and gold livery of the castle approached, bowing stiffly. "If it please you, my lord," the man said, sounding uncertain of Jon's rank, "I can show you to your chambers, at the king's order. We've prepared a suite in the Tower of the Hen for you, near Lord Stark's." "Don." Jon cast a glance at the imposing architecture around him, then nodded. "Lead on," he replied. He followed the steward through winding corridors of red stone, up a flight of stairs to a hallway lined with tapestries. Everything looked lavish, from the polished floors to the ornate doors. Ghost padded behind, sniffing suspiciously at every new smell. The steward occasionally threw a wary look over his shoulder at the direwolf, but said nothing. They arrived at a pair of carved doors. The steward pushed them open, revealing a modest suite of rooms by royal standards, yet far grander than anything Jon had known at Winterfell. There was a small hearth, a high-backed chair near a window overlooking the castle yard, and a bed draped in fine linens. The steward bowed and departed. Harwin and Darren remained outside, taking up a watchful post. Jon entered, letting Ghost explore. He set his sword belt aside and tried to steady his breathing. This was to be his home now, at least for the foreseeable future. A wave of homesickness for Winterfell washed over him. Closing his eyes, he recalled the chill air of the north, the quiet hush of the Godswood, the comforting presence of the Stark children. All of that seemed a world away in this grand southern fortress where every brick seemed to hum with intrigue. Time passed slowly. Jon wasn't sure how long he stood at the window, stroking Ghost's ears, watching the swirl of activity in the courtyard below. Servants unloaded trunks. Stable hands led horses away. Guards marched in neat patrols. At last there came a knock on the door, and Darren leaned in. "My lord, Sir Barristan Selmy is here for you." Jon turned. Barristan's white cloak and silver hair were unmistakable. He offered Jon a polite bow. "His Grace the King requests your presence in the throne room." Jon's heart jumped. "No?" Barristan nodded gravely. "He wishes to begin the formal introductions." "I believe Lord Stark is already there, as are the rest of the small council members. Word has spread that something important is to be announced." Jon steadied himself with a long exhale. This was it, the moment he dreaded and awaited in equal measure since leaving Winterfell. "Lead on, sir," he said. Barristan glanced at Ghost, uncertain. "Best leave the wolf here, lad. The throne room will be crowded." Ghost gave a soft whine, as though he understood. Reluctantly, Jon nodded. "Stay," he told Ghost. "I'll return soon." He followed Barristan, with Harwin and Darren trailing behind. They descended the stairs and traversed long corridors until they reached the massive double doors of the throne room. Two gold cloaks opened them with a flourish. The hall stretched before them, a cavernous space with pillars, high windows that let in streams of light. And at the far end, the Iron Throne perched on its raised dais. Thousands of twisted swords fused by dragonfire. An ominous seat for any mortal. The hall was crowded with nobles, courtiers, knights, and lords in all manner of finery. A low chatter buzzed through the air, rippling as Jon's arrival was noticed. He spotted Ned standing near the foot of the dais, arms folded. King Robert stood in front of the throne next to the Queen, who wore an expression like carved ice. Joffrey, in fine embroidered silks, hovered near his mother, face taut. Tyrion Lannister, small and watchful, lounged off to one side. Varys, the spymaster, was there in voluminous robes, his expression calm and unreadable. Littlefinger, with his mocking smile, stood beside him, and Grand Maester Pycelle hovered behind them, like an anxious old crow. The hall's attention began to shift. Someone announced, "Jon Snow of Winterfell, come forward." A hush fell. Jon's blood pounded in his ears. He walked down the wide aisle, the gazes of 100 or more lords and ladies following his every step. Ned nodded in encouragement as Jon reached the dais, so he stopped beside his father, offering a small bow to the king. Robert's voice boomed across the silence. "My lords and ladies, we gather here today to set right a matter of utmost importance for the future of the realm." He gestured for Jon to step forward. "This boy has been known as Jon Snow, the son of Eddard Stark, but by my decree, and with the authority vested in me as King of the Andals and the First Men, I hereby name him Jon Baratheon, my own son and rightful heir to the Iron Throne." A sudden uproar of murmurs and gasps swept the crowd. Some looked stunned, others fearful. Jaime Lannister stood at the edge of the dais, jaw clenched, a hand on his sword hilt. Cersei's face whitened in fury. Joffrey let out a choked sound of protest, stepping forward, but the Queen clasped his arm, restraining him. Robert continued, raising a sealed parchment. "I have had this document prepared. It carries my seal and signature, and that of the Grand Maester. Lords of my council, witness it now." He broke the seal, opening it for all to see. "Jon Baratheon, arise and be recognized." Jon's heart felt ready to burst from his chest. He forced his feet to move, stepping forward as Robert placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Ned stood close, looking grim yet resolute. Robert looked out over the gathering. Does anyone here dare challenge this right? A thick silence ensued. Jon felt more eyes upon him than he'd thought possible. The queen's face was a mask of stone. Joffrey glared, fists clenched. Jaime's lips curled in contempt. Littlefinger's smirk only broadened, as though this were the greatest sport he had ever witnessed. Varys looked on with a small, careful smile, his fingers steepled. No one spoke. At length, the king lowered the parchment. "Then it is done," he pronounced. "Henceforth, Jon Baratheon shall be prince of the Seven Kingdoms, standing next in line for the crown. May the gods look upon him with favor." Jon drew a breath that felt like broken glass in his throat. He bowed again, stiffly, uncertain where else to turn. In that moment, the entire realm seemed to shift beneath his feet, as though a new chapter of history had begun with the stroke of a pen. The hall erupted in a scattered tumult, some kneeling, some still murmuring in shock. Cersei and Joffrey stood in cold silence, their fury a tangible force. Ned placed a hand on Jon's other shoulder, the only warmth Jon could feel in the swirl of fear and excitement. This was what they had come here for, yet it felt more terrifying than any dream he'd ever had. The Iron Throne loomed behind them, a silent witness to the upheaval. Robert's eyes flashed with triumph, as though daring the world to oppose him. And so Jon Baratheon, formerly Snow, stood beneath the vaulted arches of the Red Keep, betwixt his foster father's steady presence and the king's iron will, with the entire court in tumult around him. Whatever came next, from cunning Lannister plots to the realm's acceptance or rebellion, there was no going back. The die was cast. He stood as prince and heir, crowned in the uncertain hopes of Robert Baratheon's heart, and shadowed by the watchful malice of those who would see him fall.